Hello everyone, this is your instructor in income taxation and our topic for today is fundamental principles of taxation. Of course, when we say fundamental principles of taxation, we pertain to the basic concepts of taxation. Since this topic is very long, ang gagawin natin, hahatiin natin to into different parts and for today, ang ating pag-uusapan ay yung part 1 ng Fundamental Principles of Taxation. Since we are dealing with the basic principles of taxation, hindi nawawala na i-define natin yung pinaka-importanting term and of course, the most important term here is taxation. So let's start by defining taxation. Taxation is defined as the process or means by which the sovereign or independent state through its lawmaking body or the legislature imposes burdens upon subjects and objects within its jurisdiction for the purpose of raising revenues to carry out the legitimate objects of government. Ang sabi dito sa definition, ang taxation daw ay process. Bakit siya tinawag na process? Bakit siya process? Kasi dadaan ito sa steps na kailangan gawin para ma-exercise ng government ang kanyang power to tax. So, hindi ito basta nangongolekta lang ng tax. Merong dadaan ng steps until makakolekt ang government ng taxes. Taxation is the process or means. Ang ibig sabihin ng means ay pamamaraan, by which the sovereign or the independent state, sa madaling salita, yung government, through its lawmaking body, so sa pamamagitan ng kanyang lawmaking body. Sa Pilipinas, tinatawag natin yan na legislative department. And here in the Philippines, the legislative department pertains to the Congress. And the Congress is composed of two bodies. The first body is called the Senate, and the second body is called the House of Representatives. Again, ang taxation ay proseso o pamamaraan na kung saan ang gobyerno sa pamamagitan ng kanyang legislative department ay nag-i-impose or nagpapataw ng burden or tax. Ang tanong, kanino pinapataw o saan pinapataw ang burden? Of course, sa subjects and objects of taxation. Kapag sinabing subjects and objects of taxation, ito yung mga pwedeng patawan ng tax. In our law, pwedeng i-impose yan sa persons. When we say persons, of course, may dalawang klase yan. Yung una ay natural persons, so tayo yon. At yung pangalawa ay juridical persons. Juridical persons are artificial persons gaya ng corporation. Ang juridical person, hindi talaga ito tao. Pero sa mata ng batas, it's as if person siya. Aside from persons, pwede ring i-impose ang tax sa properties. That's why we have property tax. So, pwedeng i-impose ang tax sa pagmamay-ari ng taxpayers. Pwede ring i-impose ang tax sa privileges or rights. For example, you have the privilege to earn. So, may tax yon. Another, You have the privilege to donate. So, may tax yon. You have the privilege na magpamana. So, may tax yon. Another, pwede ring i-impose ang tax sa transactions or interest. For example, nagbenta ka. Kapag nagbenta ka, of course, that is a transaction. So, pwedeng i-tax yon. Another, nag-donate ka. That is a transaction. And since that is a transaction, may tax yon. Of course, magpapataw ang Philippine government within its jurisdiction. Hindi naman siguro pwedeng magpataw ang Philippine government sa ibang bansa na walang kinalaman dito sa Philippines. Ang tanong, bakit nagpapataw ang government ng tax? Of course, for the purpose of raising revenues. This is the primary purpose of taxation, to raise revenue for the government. Bakit kailangan niyang mag-raise ng revenue? Kailangan niyang mag-raise ng revenue to carry out the legitimate objects of government. For example, ngayong pandemic, dahil nakakolekta siya ng tax, gagamitin yon ng government sa pagtulong sa atin ngayong pandemic. That is the definition of taxation. Again, taxation is defined as the process or means by which the sovereign or independent state, through its lawmaking body or the legislature, imposes burdens upon subjects and objects within its jurisdiction for the purpose of raising revenues to carry out the legitimate objects of government. Aside from that definition, we have another definition here. In simple terms, taxation is the act of levying a tax to apportion the cost of government among those who in some measure are privileged to enjoy its benefits and must therefore share its burdens. Ang sabi dito, ang taxation daw is the act of levying. Ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng levying? Levying is imposing a tax. Ito yung pag-i-impose ng tax. Ito yung pagpapataw ng tax. Levying is the enactment of tax law. Ito yung pag-e-enact or paggawa ng tax law. Therefore, ang unang proseso ay levying a tax. Bakit kinokolektahan ng tax ang isang tao? Of course, dahil merong batas na nagsasabi na dapat kolektahan yung isang tao na yon ng tax. Kasi may batas tungkol sa tax at kung babasahin mo yung batas sa tax, pasok yung isang tao na yon. Based on tax law, that person is liable to pay income tax. Kaya meron tayong tinatawag na tax code. Yung tax code natin dito sa Philippines ay yung the National Internal Revenue Code of the Philippines. Again, ang tawag sa tax code natin ay National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 na nag-take effect or naging effective noong January 1, 1998. That is Republic Act 8424. Ang tanong, bakit kailangang gumawa ng tax law? Kailangan gumawa ng tax law Kasi kailangang lumikom ng pera o pondo ang gobyerno to apportion the cost of the government. To apportion yung gastusin niya among those who in some measure are privileged to enjoy its benefits and must therefore share its burdens. Let's proceed to the inherent powers of the state. Actually, there are three inherent powers of the state. But before that, why do we call them inherent powers of the state? When we say inherent powers of the state, we pertain to the powers of the state na hindi na kailangang i-grant pa ng Constitution. So, meaning to say, the moment or once you establish an independent state, these powers shall be available right away. So, from the time na na-create ang Philippine government, itong mga powers na to, available na sila right away. So, yan ang ibig sabihin ng inherent powers of the state. Bakit available right away itong mga powers na to? Because these powers are essential powers. These powers are fundamental powers. So walang kwenta yung gobyerno kung wala itong mga powers na to. That's why hindi kailangang i-grant ito ng Philippine Constitution. That is the meaning of inherent powers of the state. There are three inherent powers of the state. The first power is the power of taxation. The second power is called police power. And the third power is called power of eminent domain. The first inherent power of the state is the power of taxation. Tinatawag din ito na power to tax or taxation power. The power of taxation is the power by which the state raises revenue to defray the necessary expenses of the government. So, kailangan na mag-raise ng revenue ang government para meron siyang pangtustos dun sa gastusin ng gobyerno. At para mabayaran niya yung mga necessary expenses ng government. I have already extensively discussed this definition. So let's proceed to the second inherent power of the state. The second inherent power of the state is the police power. Take note, hindi ito yung power ng policemen, hindi ito yung power ng police. When we say police power, this is the power of the state for promoting public welfare by restraining and regulating the use of liberty and property. In other words, ito yung power of the state to enact laws. Ito yung power ng state na gumawa ng batas. Of course, for the promotion of public welfare or to protect the well-being of the people. That is police power. So, ang main objective ng police power is promotion of public welfare. So, paano ma-achieve itong promotion of public welfare? Of course, by restraining and regulating the use of liberty and property. So, halimbawa, ngayong pandemic, we have to observe social distancing protocols. Hindi ka pwedeng hindi mag-face mask. So, that is prohibited. Bawal ang hindi mag-face mask. So, bakit kailangang i-restrain yung freedom mo na hindi mag-face mask? Of course, to promote public welfare. Kasi nga, di ba, para hindi mahawaan ng COVID. Again, the police power is the power of the state for promoting public welfare by restraining and regulating the use of liberty and property. The third inherent power of the state is the power of eminent domain. The power of eminent domain is the power of the state to acquire private property for public purpose upon payment of just compensation. Ang sabi dito, it is the power of the state to acquire private property. Bakit kailangang i-acquire yung private property? Of course, that is for public purpose. Pero syempre, dahil private property yan, hindi pag-aari ng gobyerno, the owner of the property is entitled for payment. Of course, with respect to the fair value of the property na kinuha ng gobyerno. Ang tawag natin doon sa bayad ay just compensation. So yan ang power of eminent domain. Ang tanong, kahit ayaw ba ng taxpayer, kahit ayaw ba ng private individual or person, the answer is yes. Wala siyang magagawa dyan. Kasi karapatan ng gobyerno na kunin yan, provided of course, na gagamitin yung private property for public purpose. And of course, the owner of the private property shall be entitled for payment, equivalent to the fair value of property taken by the government. So that is the power of eminent domain. Again, there are three inherent powers of the state. They are the police power, the power of taxation, and the power of eminent domain. Next, similarities among the three inherent powers of the state. Ano yung pagkakahalintulad ng three inherent powers of the state? First, they are inherent in the state. So, ibig sabihin, these powers are not actually granted by the Philippine Constitution. These powers shall be available right away the moment na may na-create na independent state. Next, second, they exist independently of the Constitution. Ibig sabihin, these powers are available kahit wala sila sa Philippine Constitution. So, hindi kailangan na nakalagay sa Philippine Constitution na the Philippine government shall have the power to tax. Hindi kailangan yon. Another, the Philippine government shall enact laws or promote general welfare in the exercise of police power. Hindi rin kailangan yon na nakalagay sa Constitution. Pati rin yung power of eminent domain. Hindi rin kailangan na expressly provided siya sa Constitution. That's why they exist independently of the Constitution. Although the conditions for their exercise may be prescribed by the Constitution. So, maaaring may makikita ka sa Philippine Constitution pertaining sa limitations ng pag-exercise ng government ng kanyang power to tax. Next, third, these are ways by which the state interferes with private rights and property. For example, I earned 1 million pesos. Kanino yung 1 million pesos na yon? Kanino yung pera na yon? Of course, sa akin. Pero ang sabi ng batas, itatax yung 1 million. Of course, kung hindi ako magbabayad ng tax, pwedeng kunin ng gobyerno yung pagmamay-ari ko. Another example, humahawak ka ng baril na hindi naman lisensyado. So you are possessing firearms na hindi naman lisensyado. So the Philippine government has the right na kunin yung baril na yon. Another example, meron kang illegal drugs. Obviously, bawal ang illegal drugs. Sa'yo yung illegal drugs, pero dahil bawal yan, they will not promote general welfare at nasa batas na bawal na mag-carry ng illegal drugs, so the government can take it away from you. Kaya merong interference itong mga powers na to sa private rights and property. Ganon din sa power of eminent domain. For example, may bahay ka at meron kang lupa. Kaso kailangan yan ng gobyerno for road expansion. So, may karapatan ba yung gobyerno na kunin yung property mo na yon? Of course, the answer is yes. Wala kang magagawa provided na ang purpose kung bakit kinuha yon ay for public purpose. Pero take note, dapat meron kang bayad. Dapat babayaran ka ng gobyerno. At ang tawag dun sa bayad mo ay just compensation. Kaya lahat ng inherent powers na yan will interfere with private rights and properties. Next, fourth, legislative in nature and character. Yes, the power to tax, police power, and power of eminent domain are inherent. Diba? Inherent yung mga powers na yan. However, hindi pwedeng basta na lang i-implement yung mga yan. Dapat bago ma-implement, may batas muna. That's the reason why they are legislative in nature and character. Next, they presuppose an equivalent compensation received directly or indirectly by the persons affected. For example, sa pagbabayad mo ba ng tax, may benefit kang natatanggap? Of course, the answer is yes. Yung benefit is either direct benefit or indirect benefit. That's why maayos yung dinadaanan mo. So meron tayong benefits na natatanggap sa pamamagitan ng pagbayad ng tax. Ganon din sa police power. Imagine kung walang police power, hindi maayos ang Pilipinas at sobrang gulo ng Pilipinas. Ganon din sa power of eminent domain. So, those are the similarities of the three inherent powers of the state. Next, let's proceed to the distinctions among the three inherent powers of the state. Kapag sinabing distinctions, ang ibig sabihin niyan ay differences. So, pag-aaralan natin yung pinagkaiba ng tatlong inherent powers of the state. First, as to nature, taxation is the power to enforce contributions to raise government funds. Police power is the power to make and implement laws for the general welfare. And eminent domain is the power to take private property for public use with just compensation. As you can see, parang yung definitions lang to ng taxation, police power at power of eminent domain. Na-discuss ko na to, so no need na i-expound ko pa. Next, second, as to authority. So, sino ang may karapatan na mag-exercise ng inherent powers na to. So, sa power to tax or the taxation power or the power of taxation, syempre, government lang yan. It must be exercised only by the government. Ganon din sa police power. Only the government can exercise the police power. However, sa power of eminent domain, it may be granted to public service or utility companies. For example, yung mga companies na nagpro-provide ng tubig, meron silang kapangyarihan na magbungkal ng lupa. Kasi nga, kailangan yon para sa mga tubo ng tubig. Take note, hindi ito granted sa any private company. Dapat public utility companies. Again, sa taxation power at police power, government lang ang may kapangyarihan to exercise. Pero sa power of eminent domain, it may be exercised both by the government and public utility companies. Next, as to purpose. Sa taxation, for the support of the government para meron siyang gagastusin. Sa police power naman, for the promotion of general welfare through regulation. At sa power of eminent domain naman, bakit kinukuha yung private property? Of course, that is for public use. Next, as to persons affected. Sa taxation, community or a class of individuals. So, lahat tayo. It applies to all persons, property, and excises that may be subject thereto. Sa police power naman, it also applies to community or a class of individuals. So, it also applies to all. Hindi porke nagtatrabaho ka sa gobyerno ay exempted ka na or wala ka ng penalty or parusa. It must apply to all. Sa power of eminent domain naman, on an individual as the owner of personal property or private property. It only pertains to a particular property na kailangan ng gobyerno. Next, scope. Sa taxation, ang scope ay plenary, comprehensive at supreme. Kapag sinabing plenary, kompleto. Kapag sinabing comprehensive, sakop niya lahat. It covers persons, businesses, activities, professions, rights, and privileges. For example, may income ka. Dahil may income ka, may tax yon. Nag-donate ka, may tax. May negosyo ka, may tax. Namatay ka, merong tax. Of course, kung meron kang mga properties na ililipat sa mga tagapagmana mo. So, nandun na lahat, na-consider na lahat. Kapag sinabi namang supreme, the power of taxation is the highest and the strongest power. Kasi nga, ang tax ang lifeblood ng gobyerno. Kung walang tax, walang gobyerno. Kaya ang power to tax is supreme. Sa police power naman, broader in application, general power to make and implement law. The police power will promote general welfare. Siyempre, pag sinabi mong general welfare, mas broad talaga yung application niyan. Sa power of eminent domain naman, merely a power to take private property for public use. Next, effect. Sa power of taxation, the contribution becomes part of public fund. So, yung tax magiging revenue yan ng government once collected. Sa police power naman, no transfer of title. There may be just a restraint on the injurious use of property. Pinagbabawalan ka na gumamit ng properties na makakasira sa general welfare. Sa power of eminent domain naman, there is a transfer of title to property kasi from private owner to the government. I-transfer yung private property o i-transfer yung title ng private property sa government. That is from private owner to the government. Next, benefits received. So, lahat naman yan, meron tayong mare-receive na benefits dyan sa power of taxation, police power, at power of eminent domain. Sa power of taxation, in the form of protection and benefits received from government. Sa police power naman, no direct and immediate benefit, but only such as may arise from the maintenance of a healthy economic standard of society. For example, yung pagbabawal sa paninigarilyo sa public places. That is an exercise of police power. Of course, meron kang benefit na makukuha dyan since harmful ang paninigarilyo. So, yung pagbabawal sa paninigarilyo sa public places ay exercise yan ng police power. Sa power of eminent domain naman, ang benefit ay yung market value of property taken. Take note, di ba sa power of eminent domain, babayaran yung private owner ng tinatawag na just compensation. Next, amount of imposition, meaning to say, amount imposed. Sa power of taxation, of course, no limit. Walang limit. Unlimited ang amount of tax. Pero syempre, nakadepende yon sa kapasidad ng isang taxpayer na magbayad ng tax. Sa police power naman, may pera bang kinokolekta sa police power? Yes, meron. Pero hindi kasing laki ng tax. Maliit lang sa police power kasi it is only sufficient to cover cost of license and the necessary expenses of police surveillance and regulation. Yung perang nalilikom dito ay hindi intended to support the activities of the government. Kung meron mang singil sa police power, that is simply to cover the cost of license or regulation. Sa power of eminent domain naman, there is no imposition. Walang pera na matatanggap ang gobyerno dyan. Actually, ang gobyerno pa ang magbabayad sa may-ari ng private property. Recall, nakukunin ng gobyerno yung private property for public use. So, magbabayad ang gobyerno ng just compensation. So, hindi makakalikom ng pera ang gobyerno sa pag-exercise ng power of eminent domain. So, those are the distinctions or differences among the three inherent powers of the state.